In this video, we're going to be talking about the best settings to get cinematic footage out of the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro. And trust me, these settings will really help you dial in the look of your footage and make it look as professional as possible. And in like all of my setting videos, we're not going to waste any time. We're going to dive right into it so you can get exactly what you need from this video and start making the best videos possible. Just a bit of a disclaimer, the video format is going to be the settings for regular filming, then a quick section for FPV, and then an even quicker section for diving, which is not something I really do, but there are some interesting settings in here that you should turn on if you do that. Okay, cool. So let's dive in with the resolution, aspect ratio, and frame rate. Now the resolution and the aspect ratio are going to stay exactly the same for every single video that you film. And the way that you change this is that you tap the bottom of the screen to access your resolution panel. Here you want to change over to 4K at a 4:3 aspect ratio. Now 4K is the highest resolution that this camera is capable of filming in, and 4:3 is the largest aspect ratio, meaning that the camera is going to use the entire sensor to film. Now because the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro can shoot at 120 frames per second, you're really spoiled for choice in 4K for what frame rate you should be using. But just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. If you're planning on using this camera for social media videos, you always want to be filming in 30 frames per second. If you're planning on doing more cinematic stuff, I would pick 24 frames per second. If you want to slow things down, then go ahead and pick 60 frames per second. And if you really want to slow things down, film at 120 frames per second. Now, obviously, I'm not giving you a definitive answer. It really depends what you're filming and what you're doing. However, me personally, I film everything in 30 frames per second, including my FPV videos. And that's because I know that if I end up using them for social media, I want the best quality possible, and most social media applications ingest 30 frames per second the best. However, if I want to use that same 30-second clip or that 30 frames per second clip in a 24 frames per second timeline, then I'll just slow it down to 80%. Generally, FPV is pretty fast, so most people don't even notice when you slow it down, and that way you can film it for appropriate motion blur and have it fit in the right timeline. If none of that made any sense to you, just stick to 30 frames per second. Now, before you hop out of this screen, you want to tap into the top right, and this is going to bring you into your stabilization settings as well as your lens selection. Now, me personally, I film all of my regular videos with the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro with rock steady turned on. The stabilization is fantastic. You could use rock steady plus if you're in a very difficult or challenging environment. I never felt the need to do so. Also, rock steady plus punches in more into the image, so you end up losing some of that wideness on your lens. So me personally, I use rock steady for everything. And for the lens selection, you want to go ahead and you want to pick wide. Now this has a 12mm focal length equivalent, and in all of my tests, I didn't notice any kind of crazy warping or anything like that you do in the ultra wide. So for me personally, I'm picking wide for all of my videos, including FPV. Okay, next up, let's dive into the exposure settings. And the way you get there is on the home screen. On the right side of your screen, you should see this lever icon, and you want to go ahead and you want to click that. Next up, you want to tap on exposure, and you want to change it from auto to manual. Now, this next part is really important for you to understand. Your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate, meaning that if you're filming at 4K 30 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/60th of a second. Now, I'm going to leave a chart in the corner that should help you with the other frame rates, but that's the rule you want to remember for shutter speed. Next up, we have our ISO. Thankfully, DJI has built in a variable ISO indicator, meaning that you can actually pick a range, and the range that I pick is 100 to 800. Anything above 800, I feel like introduces too much noise, so that's the range that I like to play with personally. Now, if you've gone ahead and you've set these exposure settings and you find that your picture is way too bright, well, you're actually going to go ahead and need ND filters. Now, at the moment of this video, only DJI makes really good ND filters for the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro, and those are the ones that I've been using for all of my videos. So at the time of this recording, those are the ones that I recommend. I do believe that Polar Pro will eventually come out with their own version. And the reason you want to use ND filters instead of changing up your exposure is that this accurate shutter speed is what actually gives you natural looking motion blur. So this is what makes your videos cinematic and makes them look a lot more realistic and lifelike instead of the super sharp everything in focus videos that you generally see for something like an iPhone. Okay, cool. Now with the exposure out of the way, we're actually going to dive into something that's unique to the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro, and that's image adjustments. You want to go ahead and tap onto image adjustments in that same panel, and you want to change it from default to custom. Now, in my testing, I found that you want to change sharpness to -1, and you want to change noise reduction to -2. I feel like the noise reduction is a little bit aggressive, and both of these things, noise reduction and sharpening, can be fixed later in post. It's really hard to take away sharpening or to have to add back noise to get detail, if that makes sense. So it's just better to just take those things out of the camera's control and do them yourself later in post. Now, if you don't edit or do anything like that when it comes to sharpening or noise reduction, you can go ahead and leave this on the default setting. Next up, we have white balance. Now, in almost every single scenario, I usually tell people to set their white balance manually because it makes a huge difference when it comes to colors. However, with the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro, you actually have a color temperature sensor where the O in the action on the camera is, and this actually reads your scene to try and mimic the best and most natural colors possible. So DJI has put a lot of science and a lot of work into making sure that you get the right white balance all the time. So I would actually go ahead and leave this on automatic and let the camera do all of the work for you. And finally, the last thing we want to change on this panel is the color. Now you want to go ahead and change this to D-Log-M. Now D-Log-M is going to give you a really flat 10-bit color profile, meaning that you're going to get the most dynamic range out of the camera as possible. However, this does come with one downside. Because the image is flat, you need to know how to color grade it. So if you're brand new to color grading, I'm actually going to leave a link below for a color transformation LUT from DJI that you can apply in your editor, which will really bring the colors to life immediately with you having to do the least amount of work as possible. Now, if you really don't want to do any color grading, but you still want the maximum dynamic range, DJI has actually included a color mode called normal 10-bit. So if you really don't want to color grade, go ahead and pick that one over D-Log-M. Me personally, I use D-Log-M because I like to tweak the colors to my own liking. But again, if you don't want to do any color grading at all, normal 10-bit is the way to go. Okay, and the last thing you want to change before I head into the FPV section is you want to swipe down from the top, you want to click the little gear icon for settings, and then you want to scroll down all the way to grid, and then just select the regular grid and turn that on. For me, I find it really useful in composing my shots and using the rule of thirds, and it's just a great way to make sure that everything is level or straight in your shot whenever you're shooting, especially on an action camera this small. Okay, cool. Now let's dive into the FPV section. Now the good news is that if you were paying attention, you're not gonna have to repeat much of anything. All the settings are pretty much exactly the same. The only thing you want to change is you want to go back to that stabilization page, and you actually want to turn stabilization completely off. And the reason for that is that you're going to be stabilizing your FPV footage in post using a software called GyroFlow. Now, if you've never used GyroFlow before, I'm going to walk you through the steps exactly for how you need to stabilize your footage. It's actually really simple. The first thing you want to do is you want to drag and drop your file from your folder into GyroFlow. At this point, you should see this in the corner. GyroFlow will automatically detect what camera it is, and it will apply the right stabilization profile. However, we have 2 more steps left to go. I would go ahead and change the smoothness to 0.3, and I would go ahead and turn on the low pass filter and set it to 50 Hertz. I found that these are the best settings for the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro and give you the most similar stabilization settings to Real Steady or GoPro Player. And that's literally it. Everything else you want to keep the same that we discussed earlier in this video. And the final settings I want to touch on are underwater settings. Now, I don't do much of this, but I did notice throughout my testing and creating the release video for the Osmo Action 5 Pro that DJI has some pretty cool underwater settings on here. So the first thing you want to do is you want to scroll down from the top. You're going to see like this little face icon. Those are the different profiles that DJI has. You want to go ahead and you want to add a new profile, and you should see one for diving. And this is the one that you want to go ahead and select. And this is going to automatically go ahead and set all of your settings as it should be for diving purposes. And one additional cool setting that I would turn on if you're diving is that I would scroll down from the top. I would click the gear icon for settings. You want to scroll down to depth and altitude. You want to select diving, and you want to turn on auto record. I find that this setting is really cool. What it does essentially is that anytime the camera is submerged in water, it'll automatically start recording. So this saves you the time of having to fiddle with the camera, hit the record button. Maybe you're not able to, and that's really, really convenient for diving. And it also shows you how deep you are, up to 20 meters, I believe. That's what it's rated for anyways. I don't know if it'll show you past 20 meters, but it does give you a live indicator of how deep you are, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, that's it. Those are all the settings that you need to start filming professional looking cinematic footage with the DJI Osmo Action 5 Pro. Honestly, this camera is an absolute beast, and I really loved using it, especially for filming the campaign. I had a lot of fun with this, and this is going to be my FPV camera of choice moving forward. Anyways, hopefully this answered all of your questions. If you have more, definitely drop a comment below and I'll try and get to them. My comparison video between the GoPro 13 and the Osmo Action 5 Pro side-by-side videos is definitely coming. So just to make sure you don't miss that, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification icon. Anyways, that's it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, keep creating.